Today, we're going to unpack a really fascinating economic puzzle. It's a story about a law that was designed to empower people, but ended up having some results that, well, nobody saw coming.
So just imagine for a second, a government passes this landmark law. The whole point is to give women equal rights to inherit family property. The goal, super clear, give them more economic power, more choices, more freedom. But what if it didn't quite work out that way? What if it actually did the opposite and reinforced the very traditions it was supposed to change?
And this right here is the paradox at the heart of our story. On the one hand, the goal was empowerment. But on the other, the research found that after this law passed, two bizarre things happened. Women started marrying their cousins more often, and they actually started leaving the workforce. So how on earth does a law about property rights lead to that? That's what we're going to figure out.
To solve this puzzle, we first have to get our heads around the powerful economic forces at work here. And really, it all boils down to one single, incredibly powerful idea: keeping wealth in the family.
First things first, you gotta understand the setting. We're talking about what's called a patrilineal society. And that just means that basically everything, your family name, your social status, and most importantly, your property, it all flows down through the men, from father to son. You have to remember this, because it is the absolute key to the entire puzzle. Now, for a family line in a society like this, the number one economic threat, the thing they worry about most, is their land getting chopped up into a bunch of tiny, useless pieces. Think about it, a big single piece of land is just way more efficient. It's better for plowing, for irrigation, for harvesting, for everything. Breaking up the land is literally breaking the engine that generates the family's wealth.
Okay, so take a look here. This shows you the problem perfectly. When a daughter inherits a piece of that family land and then marries some guy from outside the family, boom, her piece of the land is just gone. It leaves the family line forever. And just like that, the family's property just got sliced in half for the next generation. That's a huge deal.
But, and this is the really clever part, families figured out a workaround. Here's the solution. What if she marries her cousin on her dad's side, her father's brother's son? Well, suddenly, that land she inherited, it stays right there. It never leaves the male lineage. The land stays together, the family's wealth is safe. It's an incredibly effective economic move.
And get this is not a new idea, not by a long shot. This is an ancient strategy. I mean, we're talking thousands of years ago. The book of Numbers in the Bible, it lays out the exact same playbook. If a daughter inherits, she's got to marry inside the clan to keep the property from getting away.
Okay, so that's the theory. It makes sense, right? But how in the world do you actually test something like that? I mean, it's this ancient, deep-seated tradition. Well, it turns out that a huge law change in India created the perfect real-world laboratory for researchers. So here's the backstory, real quick. For a long time, under something called the Hindu Succession Act, daughters had pretty limited rights to inherit ancestral property. But then, 2005 happened, and bam, a massive national law change. All of a sudden, all Hindu daughters, whether they were married or not, were given equal rights to their father's property. And that, right there, was the moment everything changed.
Now, here's why this was so brilliant for researchers. The law applied to Hindus and a few other related groups, but, and this is the key, it did not apply to Muslims and Christians. So you have this perfect setup. You've got your test group, the Hindus whose lives were changed by the law, and your control group, everyone else whose inheritance laws stayed exactly the same. It's a fantastic way to measure the real impact of the policy.
All right, so the stage is set. The law is passed. The big question is, what happened next? Let's dive into what the data actually showed, starting with marriage and work.
And this first chart, wow, it's a bombshell. See that vertical line at 0? That's 2005, the year the law passed. And just look what happens right after. There's this massive, undeniable spike in Hindu women marrying their cousins on their dad's side. This is literally the economic theory we just talked about playing out right in front of our eyes in the data. But here's what makes it even more convincing. The researchers also looked at marriages to cousins on the mother's side, and guess what? Nothing. No change at all. And that makes perfect sense, right? Because marrying your mom's nephew doesn't help keep land in your dad's family. This shows it wasn't just some random trend. It was a very specific, very targeted economic response to the new law. Okay, so that's marriage. Now let's talk about the second piece of this puzzle, women's work. And what's so interesting here is the timing.
All of this was happening at the exact same moment as this other huge mysterious trend in India. Right around 2005, the number of women in the workforce started to just plummet, and for years, economists were scratching their heads trying to figure out why.
And this is where that control group comes in so handy again. By comparing the two groups, researchers could isolate the exact effect of the law. And the result? Hindu women affected by this new law were almost 7% less likely to be working. That is a huge number.
So, what kind of jobs were they leaving? Well, the data shows the biggest drops by far were in tough agricultural jobs and unpaid family labor. And the thinking goes like this. Just the possibility of maybe inheriting money one day acted like a kind of safety net. It gave these women more bargaining power in the family. Enough power to say, you know what, I'm done with that backbreaking farm work.
All right, let's step back for a second and just look at the big picture, because all of this data, it really forces us to ask a much tougher, much bigger question. What does empowerment actually mean when a brand new law slams up against thousands of years of tradition and economic incentives?
Yeah, the picture that emerges is just not simple at all. What's absolutely wild is that just the idea of inheriting, the potential, was enough to change everything. Most of these women never even saw the actual land. And you have to look at it from different angles. Is leaving a tough job a step back, or is gaining the choice to leave that job its own kind of power? And let's be super clear. The law didn't create cousin marriage. That practice is ancient. What it did was pour gasoline on the economic fire that kept that tradition going.
In the end, this whole story is just a powerful reminder of how a simple law, really just a piece of paper, can send these totally unpredictable ripples through a society, all shaped by economic forces that are centuries old. And it leaves us with this really big thought to chew on. If just changing the law on paper isn't enough, if those laws can be bent and redirected by old traditions, then what does it really take to create genuine economic empowerment?